Welcome back to Grasping the Gridiron. I'm your host, Zach Thummel, and today we will be talking about 5 things college football fans should look out for this season. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about, and the first thing that college fans should look out for this upcoming season, the 2025-2026 season, is the new rule changes. So this is per the NCAA website, and I'm just gonna read it verbatim. Under the new rule, if a player presents an injury, and this is to do with injury timeouts. So if a player presents an injury after the ball is spotted by the officiating crew for the next play, that player's team will be charged a timeout. If the team does not have any timeouts remaining, a 5-yard delay game penalty will be issued. And this was put to just correct the mass amounts of players faking injuries, and it's something we all know has been going on in the game for quite some time. And so I think it's cool that there's something in place to sort of negate this a little bit. And the second one will be overtime timeouts. So the panel approved a rule change regarding overtime timeouts. If a game reaches a third overtime, each team will have one timeout beginning with the third overtime until the game has ended. So that means starting with the third overtime, a team will have one timeout for the rest of the game, meaning that every other overtime after that will not have an overtime or will not have a timeout if you use the timeout during that first overtime. So previously there used to be a timeout for every overtime period. So it would go 4 overtimes, 5 overtimes, 6 overtimes in these late games like Texas A&M a few years back. These games would be stopped every 5 seconds because they're at 2-point conversions past the third overtime. And so the game would just be stopped in between every 2-point conversion attempt to go back and forth, and it would just cause way too much stoppage of play, which I think is a good adjustment by the NCAA and the rules committee. And I just think these are all resemblant of the game trying to evolve every year like the NFL. And then the last rule change this year is coach-to-coach communication. Similar, so the FBS has already had it, or coach-to-player communication through the helmets. And the helmet communication is now translating to the FCS. So for you FCS fans out there, helmet communication from the coach to player will now be available. So that will be really helpful for certain FCS teams. And it definitely created a unique disadvantage and unfair advantage for FBS teams when they would play last year. So I think that, again, I think all 3 of these were good changes. So the second thing we're going to talk about today, and the second thing college football fans should look out for this upcoming season, is the new CFP format. So this year, the new policy will guarantee the 5 highest ranked conference champions with an automatic spot in the playoff, but instead it will no longer include a bye for the 4 highest ranked champions. Once the season concludes, and the conference champions are crowned and the conference championship games have been played, there will be a college football playoff selection committee that will seed the conference champions, 1 through 5, or whoever the conference champions are. So if you have a 3-loss SEC champion, it's going to look significantly different than if you have an undefeated or 1-loss SEC champion. So I think for the short term, this is an interesting change. I'm not sure what it'll be like long term. I think this is good for the power conferences, but I don't know what it'll do to these smaller schools, and specifically the Pac-12, which is the newest sort of meshed conference with the Mountain West and the Pac-2, Oregon State and Washington State. So it will be, again, really interesting, but only time will tell on that one. The third thing we're going to talk about today is the increased emphasis on the run game. And this is something that I think everyone will want to watch out for this year, because you look at a team like Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, Texas A&M, these power run teams. I am really excited to see those 3 specifically, and then how teams with Notre Dame, even more specifically, how teams are going to look at that run that they had, along with Ohio State and their ability to run the ball. And maybe we'll see a sort of overall shift in college football in the landscape where teams are starting to run the ball a lot more. And I specifically mentioned Notre Dame because of Jeremiah Love, and he's on paper the best running back in the game. And then you coupled that with their defense last year. And I wonder if teams are going to look at that and see like, oh, Marcus Freeman, you're onto something here with this approach, as opposed to the air raid sort of style where, if our offense can at least score a certain amount of points, we can lean on the defense a little bit to not give up 30 a game, and we can win a game by scoring maybe only 28 points or 21 points and a few field goals. So it's a really I think honestly a more wholesome approach to the game and going to get you more success consistently. And it allows when you have a success, and it's easier said than done, but when you have a defense that's consistent and good in their principles, it can take your offense doesn't have to be as high flying and successful. And we've seen with these Oklahoma Lincoln Riley teams and these air raid teams, oftentimes the defenses don't come close to what the offensive firepower is. So I mentioned Brent Key because he was an offensive line coach at Alabama and an offensive line based guy, and he uses the quarterback like a running back, and we saw that last year a ton. And I think we're going to see it again this year a lot, and it's going to start to become a part of the college football game that I think we're going to start to see a transition to this power run style, with maybe not necessarily using quarterbacks to air it out all the time, and more running a pro style like offense. And then Texas A&M is going to be a fun one to watch running the ball. I'm really, really excited to see Ruben Owens back in full-fledged form, and so that'll be sweet to see Mike Elko and that team be at full strength. And some other offensive trends that I think we'll start to see this year is the use of extra tight ends, and that goes hand in hand with the running the ball a little bit more. And I think they'll also use just larger players in general to create favorable run boxes and receivers that are more willing to block, like you see with the Kyle Shanahan scheme in the NFL. And then the other thing that I think we'll continue to see is the spreading of defenses and spreading out the offense, and then also using field and boundary principles. So when you have a long side of the field, when you're on a hash, spreading out the players to that side of the hash to then run to the short side of the field and use the defense's adjusted strength to the strong side to sort of run to the weak side. And these are all going to be things that this is nothing new in football, and it's all been done before. And a common thing that an offensive coordinator does when they're calling plays is using field strength, using boundaries to their advantage, and using the defense to their advantage. And again, it's not something new. Most of the things we see schematically in football have already been done and aren't really new trends. But this is something that I think we're going to see a lot of this year, is teams just looking for cheap, quick, easy yards through using these type of tactics. And then our fourth one here is the continued use of nickel and dime defenses as base defenses on the defensive side of the ball, of course. And that goes hand in hand with what I was saying. And that's the offense with the offense. So the offense is using tight ends and bigger players and doing these things that I mentioned, and running the ball as an adjustment to defenses continuing to use, versatile nickels and strong safety players and running big nickel type defenses. And I think that's, we see a lot with Georgia as well. When you, historically speaking, in the past few years, when you have people that can rush the passer, guys that can rush the passer, you don't need to be incredibly creative on the back end as far as coverages and scheme. So, I think that Georgia's kind of the mold for that. Can you fill that out with these 3-3-5 mint formations? I don't know. I don't know if people have the athletes up front to do that, and then at least initially to bump and run, etc. It'll be interesting, but with that, why these nickel defenses can be so successful, and why Georgia was so successful was that pass rush, of course. And I think we're seeing an emphasis on that with a team like Texas Tech this year. They go out and spend a lot of money on the pass rush and the transfer portal. And the question is it going to translate, right? And, they go get Lee Hunter, David Bailey from Stanford, Georgia Tech transfer Romeo Height. I really think that if that works this year, and obviously the coaching aspect is a whole nother conversation and question to address, but if on paper this should work, and if they really show up and perform, this can kind of be looked at as a blueprint as far as what Texas Tech did using the money. And some teams aren't obviously going to have the bank that Texas Tech's going to have with the oil money and donors that want the program to succeed. But I think that there can be a lot to take from that if that succeeds, with emphasis on the pass rush, and then maybe not having to have as good a nickel defenders or just secondary corners, safeties in general. It takes a little bit of pressure off of them when you have guys that can get to the quarterback like that. So that'll be really interesting to see how that turns out, because that's something that I think will definitely be a trend, along with running the ball. And then with that, it's going to be the defense's ability to switch from 3 linebackers, 4 linebackers to 2 linebackers to 1, and what does that look like? So yeah. And then the fifth one here, and the last one is that college football fans should look out for this season, is the Power 4 versus Group of 6. Used to be Power 5 versus Group of 5, but now we're kind of readjusting our frame in the media, and just how that dichotomy or dynamic is with the media, and how the media views the Power 4 versus the Group of 6, and what that will be like long term. So, and I say that because, and as a point of emphasis, because the first media poll was released a little bit ago, a couple days ago, from the AP poll. And, you look here, and Boise State is the only, non-Power 4 team in the top 25, and they're at 25. So barely made it. And you look at the others receiving votes in this AP poll, and, there's one Mountain West team, UNLV. In the American, it's Tulane, Memphis, Navy, Army. Sunbelt, it's Louisiana Lafayette, James Madison. MAC, Toledo, and CUSA is Liberty. So to me, this is obviously historically how it's been, with the media not respecting that. That's why it's called Power 5 versus Group of 5, and there's a reason why that exists. Because historically speaking, the conferences power-wise are not even comparable. And, now I think this dichotomy and this gap is going to get a lot larger. You're going to start to see it, and the rich are going to get richer, and the poor are going to get poorer. So I think that'll be something to watch. But I think the contrary could be said as far as if there's a 3-loss SEC champion, what's that going to look like? There are going to be a lot of incredibly interesting points as we approach these first few months, and then how is the media going to respond to this as a whole, and what are the repercussions going to be long term for some of these seedings, and then the new CFP as well. So it'll be very interesting to see all of these 5 things play out, in my opinion, and how they adjust heading into 2026 and beyond. So yeah, thank you for listening to Grasping the Gridiron. As always, I'm your host, Zach Thummel. Please like and subscribe on YouTube, share on Spotify, and we'll be coming to Apple Podcast here soon, and expanding and creating a website here soon. So be on the lookout for more content as always, and thank you for listening.